Hello, everyone, and welcome to Oracle Database Security Office Hours for September 2018. Our topic this month is Active Directory integration, and in particular, a new feature in Oracle Database 18c called Centrally Managed Users that makes integration easier to implement, manage, and maintain. Just a reminder, this call is being recorded. The recordings are usually available within a day or so of the end of the call on the Ask Tom website. Just click All Sessions to view the recording. Ask Tom is intended to give you a direct channel into your Oracle Database Security Product Development team. We try to give you an open forum to ask questions that you can't get answered easily perhaps elsewhere. The format is the same really pretty much every month. We'll start with some announcements. We'll move into a technical session, and then we end the session with open Q&A. During the session, please feel free to type any questions you want into the chat, the web conference chat, and we'll begin answering those as soon as we finish up. The big announcement this month is, of course, that Open World is just around the corner. It'll be next month, the 22nd through the 25th of October. There are dozens of sessions that relate to database security, but there are a few that I want to call to your attention, and one of those is our database security keynote. The speaker there is going to be the Senior Vice President for Database Security, Vipin Samar, and that'll be Monday, 10:30 a.m. in Moscone West, room 3006. A few other sessions of note are Mark Fallon's session, also on Monday, Inside the Head of a Database Hacker. Mark's delivered this similar session a couple of times over the last few years. It is always one of the top 2 or 3 sessions at Open World. He's an incredibly good speaker. He is our lead security architect and just does a really great job of putting you inside the mind of the people that are trying to steal your data. Again, that's Monday, 3:45 p.m., Moscone West. We've got a few other sessions. There's a data security in the GDPR era. That's on Wednesday at 11:15, and we'll be joined by Pricewaterhouse and EUS Portugal, one of the largest media companies in Portugal, to talk about how GDPR is working in real life, how people are solving the problems they get, both from a implementation standpoint, which is what EUS will cover, and from a consultative standpoint, which is what PwC is going to cover. One of the stealth sessions at Open World this year is recent security innovations you might not be using but should be. And this is a tips and tricks session that covers a variety of different features that are hidden gems that will make your life easier, make your database easier to secure, and really allow you to meet control objectives you might not have thought about otherwise. That's going to be Thursday at 1 p.m. And finally, I want to call your attention to the Database Security Hands-On Labs. This year we have 4 of them. That's more than we've had in the past. Those will be over at the Marriott Marquis, and the times will vary during one each day. Space is very limited for these. Please make sure you pre-register to ensure you get a seat. Because of the Open World commitments, we will not hold an Ask Tom office hours in October, so the next time we will see you will be Thursday, November 8th. We're still working on the topic. There is a chance we will have a really nice new product announcement, and I'm holding off hoping that that's what we'll be able to talk about. But look for more information as we get closer to Thursday, November 8th. In the support corner this month, I want to bring your attention to a change that came with the July PSU. If you are using TLS to connect to your database, SSL, Transport Layer Security, this would mean you have a listener configured for TCPS. Then over the past couple of years, ever since the Poodle vulnerability was discovered, every time you've applied a PSU, and this is true in 11.2 and 12.1, every time you applied a PSU, you then had to apply a merge patch on top of that PSU in order to fix issues with the SSL encryption. Starting in the July PSU from this year, we have updated the background libraries, the micro encryption suite, that's what MES 415 is, to include the fix for Poodle out of the box, which means you no longer have to apply a merge patch on top of 12.102. In October, we intend to make the same fix for 11.2, at which point you will no longer have to apply merge patches for any of your versions. There is a new support note, MOS note 239.7789.1, that's the Cipher Suite configuration note you see there, that talks about this and also covers several new parameters that we've introduced into your SQLnet.aura that will help you better secure your database, and perhaps not as important, but certainly nice to have, will help make database security SANs from products like Qualys not report on things like you're accepting insecure certificates. So if you are using TLS, TCPS listeners, you want to take a look at this new note. Another new note from support that we want to cover is on Audit Vault and Database Firewall. You may or may not have heard this in previous sessions, but the number one cause, probably 80% of service requests that we see on Audit Vault and Database Firewall, are as a result of improperly sized Audit Vault servers. That Audit Vault server turns into a data warehouse. It can host terabytes of data. You're ingesting large amounts of data. You're reporting on large amounts of data. And the number one cause of issues that we see is people trying to do this on 1 and 2 CPU machines with 4 to 8 gig of RAM. It's just not a very practical thing to do. But if you look at the remaining 20% of SRs that come in for Audit Vault and Database Firewall, about 15% of that remaining SR falls into a list of known issues. And so what our support team has done is collected those into one-stop shopping, a single note where we detail multiple different issues and the solutions for them. If you're using Audit Vault and Database Firewall, you want to take a good look at this new note, known issues in an Audit Vault and Database Firewall environment. Last note I want to bring to your attention relates to Key Vault. In the Bundle Patch 7 issued this summer, some of our customers encountered a condition after applying the bundle patch where they were no longer able to access the status page. This new note linked the value to be encrypted. That relates to the error message you see when you try to access the status page. But this new note covers how to recognize the condition and, more importantly, how to fix the condition so you can regain access to your status page in Key Vault. So 3 new notes, lots of new work from support this month. Definitely worth looking at if you're using TLS, Audit Vault and Database Firewall, or Key Vault. And that takes us to our technical session. And for our technical session this month, I'm going to turn it over to Alan Williams. Alan is the Senior Product Manager for really all of the access control technologies, everything from Database Vault to label security to real application security, and of course, enterprise user and centrally managed users. And Alan's going to take us through this new feature, contrast the different types of authentication for the database, enterprise user security versus CMU, and end with a comparison of when you would use each one. Alan, you want to take it away?
Great, thanks a lot, Russ. And since you did the my opening slide, I'll just go right into it. And just briefly talk about the authentication authorization mechanisms that are available in the database. The first one is the native mechanism, password, or the password verifier, which is when we say password verifier, that's the hash of the password. Clear text is never passed around in the Oracle database. The Oracle client encrypts the password, and the password verifier is also stored in the database in this case, and the database and the client compare notes to make sure they have the same verifier. And that's the authentication, the native authentication that's available in the database. And the authorization in this particular case is what we call database built-in. And that's the privileges and roles that are granted to the schema or the user for that database user. Now, next to Kerberos and PKI certificate, those are authentication only mechanisms for the database user, not enterprise user, but the database user, the schema owner, the database user there. And they could be authenticated externally using Kerberos, using either MIT or an Active Directory type key distribution center, Kerberos KDC, or using PKI certificates. And those also leverage the same authorization mechanism as the native password, which is basically the database built in, as we mentioned before. Now you get to operating system authentication. I think most of you are familiar with that as well. That's the /login that you do. The database trusts the operating system to authenticate the user. And the authorization in this particular case, in addition to what comes with this, the privileges and roles with the schema, some authorization information can also come from the OS groups that the user is a member of. Radius is another option where the database has a Radius API, so a Radius server. It could be used to authenticate the user. Sometimes this is used for multi-factor authentication, where you have a separate key or key card to allow you multi-factor authentication to the database. And authorization that's available with there is, in addition to the schema authorizations, you also have some authorizations that can be passed in from the Radius server. Then the working with directory services, we have a configuration within the database called Enterprise User Security. Allows the database to connect with an Oracle directory service like Oracle Internet Directory, Oracle Unified Directory, or in some cases Oracle Virtual Directory. That's what I call the Oracle Directory Services. And those can also be synchronized or proxied to Active Directory. And the authorizations there are a little bit more complex. This is where you have a full authorization mechanism with the directory service. So the directory subtree in one of the Oracle directory services will map to a schema directory. So the schema directory will be able to provide authorization information. So these are the various authentication authorization mechanisms that are available in the database today. And these three that are highlighted actually provide some sort of integration with Active Directory today. With Kerberos, obviously if it's using the Active Directory Kerberos KDC and authenticating through there, that's one level of the authentication that's available. Operating system, if you're using a Windows system and your Windows OS is authenticating with the with Active Directory. And then Enterprise User Security, as I mentioned, the directory service itself, like OUD or OID, can be proxied or synchronized with Active Directory. So that's another mechanism to work with Active Directory today. We're going to touch spend a little more time talking about Enterprise User Security, because that's really CMU is very similar to Enterprise User Security. So we'll talk about what this mechanism, how that works today. So Oracle databases that need to talk to Microsoft Active Directory before 18C had to go through an Oracle directory service. Now, when Enterprise User Security was first envisioned and designed, I saying, well, needs to talk. Enterprises have many databases, so Enterprise Directory Service was built with the enterprise domain of databases in mind, and it was built with those type of features. And then this directory service would then essentially manage multiple databases and then be able to synchronize users and authorizations with Microsoft Active Directory or proxy to Microsoft Active Directory. Now, when you use EUS, you have multiple authentication mechanisms: password, Kerberos, and PKI certificates. It's able to also have a centralized directory account policies for passwords and account lockouts, so you don't have to set those in each database. You are able to do authorizations, many different types of authorization mechanisms. You can have the enterprise user map directly to a database user. You can have multiple enterprise users mapped to a single shared schema through a directory subtree. You can also have multiple roles in databases, in multiple databases, mapped to enterprise roles, which can then get mapped to Active Directory. Those all provide mechanisms to provide authorization information for that enterprise user when they're working in the database. This EUS also supported the use of administrative privileges and to be able to manage users with administrative privileges with Active Directory and with Oracle Directory Services. Because this is built for multiple databases, it has this concept of enterprise domains, and I mentioned enterprise roles, which allows you to map roles from multiple databases into the directory services. Also allows databases to trust each other. The current user trusted database links. It's also EUS also integrated with some Oracle features such as Oracle Label Security and XDB. And also, because all the mapping is done in the directory service, all that information is actually stored in a directory service so that it can actually have one place to pull out that information if you're looking for, say, compliance or governance to try to see what does this user have access to, and all that information would be available in or in one location. So that's some great, very powerful capabilities in Oracle Enterprise User Security. But there's some drawbacks. If you're just looking to authenticate and authorize users, you had extra architecture elements, namely the Oracle Directory Service you have to design and implement, and the integrations between the elements. Then you have to not only design and implement, you have to configure and maintain them. And what we found is a lot of customers did not do this integration, this configuration, because of the extra work involved, sometimes the extra cost involved, licensing costs and such. So they didn't do this best practice of having a centralized user authentication authorization mechanism. So centrally managed users was developed to help in this particular case, where you're trying to simplify the connection between the Oracle database and Active Directory for authentication authorization purposes. So we remove the need to have directory service in the middle, removed the need to configure using EUS, and had the database directly talk to Active Directory. This is available in 18C Enterprise Edition and later. And I'm going to talk about the four aspects of the integration. First is authentication and how that works with this with centrally managed users. Then I'll talk about the centralized account policies. I'm going to talk about authorization, and then finally about how to connect the database to Active Directory. So that's the biggest hurdle. Once people get past that, the rest is actually relatively simple to do. Let's get into authentication. Again, we support Kerberos, just like with the EUS. In fact, we support the same three: Kerberos, PKI, and passwords, just like EUS does. You have to use the Kerberos KDC in Active Directory for this to work in with CMU. Requires no changes to Active Directory if you're using Kerberos. Using PKI certificates, the AD is there to verify the client DN and then user certificates to set up a secure connection with the client. And passwords is also supported, but we're not changing the mechanism for the Oracle login. So Oracle verifiers will need to be stored in the Active Directory. With native authentication, password authentication database, the database itself stores the password verifiers. With CMU, these password verifiers are generated and stored in Active Directory. We do not use LDAP bind to authenticate, because that requires us to have the clear text password. The database never has a clear text password for the users. All right, so we have an Oracle tool that installs the database password filter. The password filter is what generates the password verifiers that are specific for the Oracle database. Active Directory also generates their own password verifier for AD purposes, but we can't use that outside of the AD. So the database has its own password verifiers. So we have install a filter using the Microsoft APIs to generate the password verifiers. And these have to be stored in Active Directory. So we add a parameter or extend the AD schema to store these verifiers. We have an Oracle tool that actually does both things at the same time. So these verifiers are generated every time Active Directory user changes their password. So it doesn't get, once you install a filter, it doesn't automatically go and generate all the password verifiers. It waits until the user changes their password and then goes ahead and generates the database verifier. Now we have groups that are, when this is installed, it creates 3 new groups in Active Directory, and that's how you determine which verifiers are generated for that particular user. So you have fine-grained control. You can generate the verifiers for only the users that need them. You don't generate for every Active Directory user, and you only generate the verifier that you need for that user. If all your users are using 12C and 18C, verifiers that can be put in the 12C group, and that's the only verifier that gets generated. If you have a few users that still need to use 11G verifiers, then only those users will have 11G verifiers generated for them. So you have very fine-grained control of which verifiers are generated. So that was the authentication and authorization areas. In account policies, we support password policies, Kerberos policies like the timeout for the tickets, and lockout policies. After three failed attempts to log in, you can be locked out. There's password expiration, password history, all supported within whatever Active Directory supports. Now, in the authorization space, this is where it gets really interesting. When you look at using shared schema mapping and role mapping, and I'll describe that in a little more detail, this is where you can powerfully leverage the ability for Active Directory to manage the movers, joiners, and leavers in an organization centrally. You don't have to do any changes in the database for people moves that could all be managed in Active Directory. So first talk about shared schema mapping, and then we'll talk about role mapping, and then the other ones there as well. Shared schema in EUS, if you remember, you could have multiple users mapped to a single shared schema if they're in the same subtree. With CMU, we use groups. We have an Active Directory group, and they get mapped to a shared schema. So any user that gets put in that group, automatically when they log into that shared schema, and that's the database user they log into. So users that are added to it could be all managed in Active Directory as long as the directory group already exists and mapped to the shared schema. And global roles are used to provide additional authorizations to the user that's in a shared schema. So you may have people with different level, like a manager, or someone else needing different sorts of access within the database. And so they could be put into a different Active Directory group, and that's mapped to a global role, which then gets provided to the user when they log in. The database will say, okay, user X is logging in, and they're members of this shared schema Active Directory group, so they get logged in as that shared schema. And then they have these 3 other Active Directory groups that they're members of, and those are mapped to different global roles, so they'll pick up those additional global roles to give additional authorization capabilities. You can also do exclusive mapping. This isn't as interesting, but it's we know in some cases you do need to have that, especially if the user needs to be able to create objects and such inside their own schema. And this is where an Active Directory user is mapped directly to a database user. But in this case, when that user comes in, that database user has to be created. When that Active Directory user leaves, the database user has to be deleted. So this one, you can't do everything in Active Directory. So that's why we highly recommend the use of the shared schemas and role mappings to be able to manage everything in Active Directory. Administrative privileges, these things like sysoper, syskm and such, those have to be granted directly to a schema. They can't be granted to a role. So we can't use global roles to assign that to a user. So we have to actually create a schema for, let's say, sysbackup. I have a sysbackup schema. And we recommend actually using shared schema for that, even though you may only have one backup DBA. Because you're going to always have to have a backup DBA. So we recommend creating an Active Directory group for that, even though there's only one member in that group. And that would be mapped to a sysbackup database user. So when that person leaves, or you add another person to the group, they can just add that person to the group without having to make any changes on the database side. That could all be managed in Active Directory. So still, even with administrative privileges, we still recommend using the shared schema to simplify managing users with the database. Here's an example how this will work with Active Directory in the database. First, we'll have 3 users, Susan, Diana, and Jennifer. They're in an HR group. So all of them are going to get put into a group called HR Rep, and they're all going to be mapped to a single schema in the database called HR Runtime. So if any one of these users logs in, they will log in as the HR Runtime user. So you have to map this global user runtime to the AD group HR Rep, not to the individual users, but to the HR group. So the Active Directory group. And that's simply using a create user command, HR Runtime, and it's identified globally, and that's the key word here, as the DN of the group. So not the DN of the individuals, but the DN of the group. And that will map HR Runtime to the Active Directory group. Now, Susan is a manager for the group, so she needs additional privileges. So she's also put into an HR manager group. Notice that she's the only one in this particular group. And then the global role, HR manager, needs to map to the group HR manager where Susan is a member of. So that is created also globally. So it's create role HR manager, identified globally as the DN of the group. Once you have that set up, when Susan logs in, you can notice that she logs in using trusted domain, the domain / her name. And when she does a show user, she shows up as HR runtime, which is a shared schema that she was mapped to. But then when you look at her authenticated identity in user env, she shows up with the domain and her name. And in fact, you can get their enterprise identity, the full DN for Susan in this context. And when you do a select star from session roles, you'll notice she's got the HR manager role. Now, that is not assigned to HR runtime. It was only assigned because she is a member of the HR manager group in Active Directory, and the database queried for that information and then gave her the global role HR manager in the database. All right, so the fourth area, how do you connect to the Active Directory? And this is for the customers that we have worked with this, once they get over this part, the rest they seem to be able to handle on their own. We work with both single Active Directory and also with trusted domains and Active Directory Forest, as you saw in the last set of slides, the domain, the domain /. And this works along with net naming services that exist today. We did not make any changes to it. We continue to work. We work alongside it with no changes on that side. Now, some customers may extend Active Directory to do net naming, but we find most of them are actually using things like Oracle Internet Directory or OUD for net naming services, and both can coexist at the same time in the database. We also support multi-tenant, and so that an entire database can connect to the same Active Directory server, or you can have a per PDB connection to different to Active Directory. That's more useful in large organizations where each division may have their own Active Directory server, or in ISV type situations where a PDB could connect to a different customer. So that's kind of the high level connection architectures for CMU. The detailed steps to connect to the Active Directory, you need to be able to create because the Oracle, it is not, we don't use LDAP bind, we have to actually go in and query the information from Active Directory. You need an Oracle account in Active Directory. So you create like an Oracle account in there. Now I'm going to go into each of these a little bit more detail. So I'm just going to go kind of high level overview of the steps first. And if you're using password authentication, you need to install a password filter and extend the MSAD schema. If you're using Kerberos or PKI certificate authentication, you don't need to make any changes to Active Directory. You need to create a new file called dsi.aura. You could use LDAP.aura, but we recommend using dsi.aura, and we'll get into that in a gory detail a little bit later. you need to get the certificate from the AD sysadmin for the AD server. I need to be able to, you need to create the wallet with that login information for the AD, verify the wallet works, and then configure the AD connection. So the Oracle service account, Oracle database needs to get some information from AD for authentication and authorization purposes. So things like it needs to verify that user exists. Sometimes they just get the DN for the user, like in using PKI certificates. So they need to verify that DN exists for the user. They need to be able, for password use, they need to be able to retrieve verifier for a user, and also retrieve the groups that the user is a member of. You need to be able to create this user account at the highest point in the directory or the domain for the Active Directory that all users will need to log into the database. So in some cases, if you have multiple domains, you may need to put this in the root of the directory. Now we're going to change that in the future, but in this particular case, it's basically the highest point in the tree where all the users are below that directory and domain. If you're doing passwords, then you need to install the password filter. We have this utility that in the Oracle Home Bin directory, opwdintg.exe, that needs to be copied to each AD server. Right now, we only support the English OS setting. And then you run this and then respond to the prompts. Do you want to extend the schema? Yes, no. And then, this will be permanent. Yes. And then if you're upgrading from using an EUS filter, it'll ask you if you want to deinstall it first, and then for that you'll have to answer yes, and then rerun this this utility. But if it generally that'll be no, and then you want to install Oracle Password Filter, yes, and then requires a reboot. So that's those prompts associated with the filter. And I mentioned that we create the 3 groups when the schema is extended and the filter is installed. This gives you the fine-grained control of which clients are supported, which verifiers get generated. So if everyone is using 12C and above in terms of clients, then all you need to do is put the users that need access to the database in the Aura VFR 12C group, and those users will get the 12C verifier generated. You will not generate 11G or the MD5 verifiers unless users are added to that. So if there's any concern about, let's say, like the WebDAV client, the verifiers, and if you're not using WebDAV, you don't need to have those generated. Is an interesting tip to help make it easier to integrate this with your organization. Do this part early in the cycle so that users will have time to upgrade, generate these verifiers early in their normal upgrade password refresh cycles. So it's maybe every 3 months. So otherwise, if it's done late and you need users to access the database and verifiers need to be generated, they'll need to reset their passwords out of cycle. All right, so what is this file? This dsi.aura. That's the new file that we created for integrating with for CMU. It's very similar to LDAP.aura, and you'll recognize it. Much of the same parameters, except you have the DSI underscore appended, prepended actually to the parameters. So LDAP.aura could be used, but we recommend using DSI.aura. DSI.aura was built in conjunction with CMU and is better placed, and I'll hear some of the pros and cons of that. LDAP.aura, you can only have one for the database, so you can't have a per PDB assignment. Where DSI.aura allows both. You can have one for the entire database or allow multiple AD connections, one for each PDB. LDAP.aura can be used for net naming or AD, but not both. And DSI.aura is just for AD. Even if you're not using net naming, you might use in the future. You might use that in the future. You want that option to be able to do that in the future. So you want to be able to go ahead and put DSI.aura for CMU from the beginning. Just a note, DBCA only works with LDAP.aura. So the steps I'll be listing here, we call them manual steps, but it's not not all that hard to do the integration using the DSI.aura. So here's the two files, ldap.aura and dsi.aura. Again, very similar. It's just the DSI underscore is prepended to the parameter labels. And then the directory server type is AD. So this is the interesting part. Where do you put the dsi.aura file? You've got it created now. Where do you put that? So there's this the concept of the wallet location, where the in dsi.aura is stored the same place that the wallet is stored for that connection to AD. So this concept called the effective wallet location. If there's no wallet underscore location specified in SQLnet.aura, the effective wallet location will be the default location for the wallet for the PDB, which is the Oracle base admin DB unique name PDB GUID wallet. Now that may not exist. You may look in your directory after you built it, and that may not exist. So you have to actually build that directory and store your dsi.aura as well as your wallet for that PDB in that location. If you're putting it into the effective location for the entire database, is one level up. You move the wallet underneath the DB unique name, and then that will be where you put the AD wallet and the dsi.aura. If the wallet underscore location is specified in SQL.aura, then that's where the dsi.aura as well as the wallet is stored. Now, when you do that, when you specify the location in SQL.aura, then all the PDBs will use that same one. You can't do a per PDB in 18C with this. We're changing that in the future, but right now, if you use a wallet location and specify that, then you're going to have all the PDBs talking to the same Active Directory server, which in many cases is fine. So that's the first places it looks for this particular wallet location. Then it goes into the standard places to look for the ldap.aura, like ldap admin, environment variable, co-placed under Oracle Home and TNS admin, environment variable. Now, if dsi.aura and LDAP are both in the same directory, the DSI takes precedence if it's for CMU. If they're in different directories and LDAP.aura is found first and it does have some directory service information, then it will take precedence, and then CMU AD will not be enabled. So just some things to look at. Now, we recommend using the Oracle-based derived locations. Starting with 18C, there's another new feature. Oracle Home can be set as a static directory, so nothing changes. It's just where the software gets installed. So fast patching allows the entire Oracle Home to be updated quickly, so there's no dynamic information to be stored in there. There's and I mentioned if you have one AD for all the containers, you put in an Oracle base admin DB unique name, the wallet. And then for individual containers, go one level underneath and put the wallet underneath PDB GUID, and you can get the PDB GUID information in the database. When you query for PDB information. And dsi.aura and wallet has to be in the same directory, and create the directories if they don't exist. And mention this, if you want to do per PDB, you can't use SQLnet.aura to point to a wallet. That's again in 18C only. There's a way, and in the future, we're going to have some changes there. And if you're using administrative privileges or having users with administrative privileges authenticate and authorize with CMU, you're going to need to configure the password to use a 12.2 format. And creating the, you need to create the auto login wallet. That's the next step. So it has to be auto login, and then you're going to be putting in the information to create an entry for the username. That's the Oracle account in Active Directory. In this case, it's called Oracle. And then you need to add in DN for that user, for that username from Active Directory, and then create the password and put that all into the wallet. And then get that AD certificate that you got before from the AD admin, and add that as well, and then display it to make sure you have all the information in there. And once you got the wallet and dsi.aura into the same directory in one of the Oracle-based directories, then you need to run a couple alter system set LDAP directory access to password, and then alter system set LDAP directory sysoff to yes if you want to allow administrative privileged users to be authenticated and authorized with Active Directory. Then you need to do a restart, and that should be it. Now, what I found is every time you do it, it doesn't always work correct the first time, so you kind of want to do a little troubleshooting. So first thing you want to do in the database server is to make sure you ping the AD server exists. Can you see it network-wise? And then use LDAP search to make sure that the Oracle account in the AD is reachable. And you do a format for the LDAP search there, and then use LDAP bind to, again, test the connection, and then use a wallet to encrypt it and make sure that the wallet works correctly. So those are the various steps you can do to make sure that all the other pieces are working when you enable it for the database. All this information is actually in the chapter 5 of Database Security Guide. I've been working with the documentation person, updating this all the time as questions come up, like, oh, maybe we didn't explain that well enough, and we update the documentation. So this is continually being updated. So this is a good reference for, you shouldn't have to go into any MOS notes. This should all be in the Database Security Guide. All right, so comparisons between EUS and CMU, the two systems that are the most alike for this to work with Active Directory. CMU and EUS both authenticate, authorize, very similar mechanisms for that, with password Kerberos PKI and then enforcing the account policies. Authorizations are a little bit differently, especially for roles. But in essence, they both do authentication, authorization, very similar methods. EUS, as I mentioned, was designed for the multi-database concept, and so it has additional features like the current user trusted database link, and supported with additional features in the database, and then have that centralized reporting in the Oracle Directory Service. Now, CMU, it is simpler. You know, it takes away the EUS and the Oracle Directory Service, but it also allows, and once the Oracle database is provisioned with the right global users and the global roles, all the movers, joiners, and leavers can be managed in Active Directory. So that's a huge win for process simplification in at customer sites. So in summary, the CMU meets a lot of customer needs for a simpler connection to the Active Directory when you're just really looking for the authentication authorization pieces. Allows the password Kerberos and PKI authentication, mapping enterprise group, the Active Directory groups, which is a much simpler mechanism than using subtrees to the shared database accounts. And then using, so you can still use exclusive mapping if you need it. And then allows the support of Active Directory account policies, a centralized location for that. No client updates are required. You don't have to upgrade to 18C clients. You can use 11G and onwards, including WebDAV clients. And EUS is not going away. Oracle Directory Services and EUS is how you use to integrate with Oracle Directory Services. So that will continue and will provide that more that multi-domain, multi-database, enterprise domain type capabilities. That's it in a nutshell, and I'll turn it over to Russ.
Thanks, Alan. We've had a couple of questions come in on chat.
The goal of the Oracle wallet is not clear to me. One wallet to be generated per CMU installation, one per server. Oh, good question there. So Chris asked about the Oracle wallet. Let me go, there we go. So for the database to talk to Active Directory, the database is going to talk to Active Directory over LDAP-S, TLS. So it's going to connect into Active Directory on port 636. To do that, the database has to know that it can trust the SSL certificate that Active Directory is presenting. So the database has to have a trusted certificate from Active Directory that it can use to make that connection with. We store trusted certificates in a wallet, and so one of the things that we put in the wallet you'll see it down here at the bottom of this slide, is the root certificate that was used to generate the Active Directory certificate. Okay? And this will allow that LDAP-S connection to occur. Over LDAP-S, the database has to connect in as an Active Directory user, that service account we created in Active Directory. So within the wallet, we're going to store the username that we created in Active Directory. We usually just call that Oracle, and the distinguished name for that user, the actual place in the directory to where that user resides, and the password. So this wallet is used just to allow the database to make the connection to Active Directory in order to verify when an incoming database connection comes in, does this user exist in Active Directory? Did they supply the right Kerberos ticket or password or certificate? Does that answer the question, Chris? So Chris says, yes, so one wallet to be created and be distributed to all servers hosting databases. Yes, if you're using the same service account for all of the databases that are participating, you can just copy the wallet to each of them. They don't have to be different.
While you were speaking, one of them is from Aaron, and he wants to know, is CMU licensed separately with, or is CMU a part of DBE or EE, or is it licensed separately?
Yeah, sorry I didn't make that more clear. It comes with the database as long as you get an Enterprise Edition.
Thanks. And he had a slash in there. Do you know if it's included with SE2 or is it only with EE?
Only EE.
Perfect, thanks. Justin asks, will we be able to achieve the SSO experience where Kerberos cache tickets are provided automatically and login is secure, but there's no password challenge after the initial Windows session login? Particularly, he's thinking about .NET applications, possibly presuming they use ODP.NET.
That's the goal. So if you're using in a Windows environment, that should just flow with the Windows Kerberos login. So that's the goal with the Kerberos.
Great, thanks. And for Aaron and Justin, if there were follow-up questions, please enter them in chat or feel free to unmute yourself and break in. Last question in chat is from Eric, and he asks, since users get mapped to shared schemas and roles based on their Active Directory groups, how does this work with PL SQL units with definer rights, packages that ignore roles? Do they just get the privileges of their shared schema?
Yes, they get the. So when I talk to customers about this, in many they even with EUS, what they do is say, well, we have 1,000 users all connect to the shared schema, and we don't give them any privileges through that. We give them all the privileges through roles on that. So it really depends on your situation. And that, and for some users, it works if basically they don't even do create session through the granted to the shared schema, and they do everything through the roles. Now if you have PL SQL and you have that's owned by that particular by that schema, that shared schema, then you're gonna have to consider, what you need to be able to run that with that shared schema.
Neat. Justin asks, what about Windows ODBC interface? What would connection strings or specs look like to make use of CMU?
Let's see. It's the first time I had that question. You know what? I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. I'm not that familiar with the ODBC API on that one. Unless you can think of the answer, Russ.
I suspect it's no different than non-CMU. To the user, there really isn't a difference. At least that's been my experience. But as Alan says, it'd be good to check. Justin, if you'll send me an email, my address is on the screen here. I'll get you a more definitive answer as soon as we can. Alan, aren't you doing a session at Open World with the ODBC team?
I'm doing a session with Santanu and Christian Shea. They do a lot of Windows thing. I'm not sure if it's ODBC, but they're probably very familiar with it. So, yeah, I've got a session Tuesday at I believe 5:45 p.m. I got 15 minutes in that presentation where I talk about CMU. with those guys.
Sounds like that's going to be a really interesting presentation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It should be a very full session. Let me just make one more note, Russ. When you do set up the connection, Active Directory, Oracle Database wants to use a SASL bind using to connect to the to Active Directory. So the Active Directory needs to make sure that that's enabled on their side.
And I've never had to do anything special for that. Isn't it enabled by default, or did that change?
I'm not 100% sure that's an AD configuration issue. It's just that we did find some customers that found that they did not have enabled on their AD side. So in the future, we're going to allow both the SASL and non-SASL binds to the to Active Directory, but not with 18C.
And that'll all be forced over LDAP-S SSL.
Yeah, it's all over. All the connections are encrypted. It's just with SASL bind, it's an additional protocol on top of that.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. And speaking of SSL and SASL bind, Justin asked a follow-up question. Are there any special encryption or hash settings needed in Active Directory?
No, we just use I believe it's the, we say TLS. You say TLS/SSL, but it's TLS. We support. It's 1.2, I believe.
Okay.
So nothing special.
I did notice in the construction of the wallet, when you were showing us the commands to add to the wallet, that we are putting the trusted root certificate from Active Directory into the wallet. So we're just making use of the default port 636 LDAP-S connection to the Active Directory.
Yeah, that's we definitely want to keep this connection secure. So we're using the Active Directory certificate. Yes.
Great. Justin, did that answer your question? Oh, there he comes. Yes, it did. Thanks. Guys, I want to let Alan go here. Are there any more questions for Alan? All right. Alan, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking time, especially this close to Open World, to join us. It's been one of the most interesting and customer requested features for a very long time. So congratulations to you and your development team for getting this out the door. It's definitely going to make our lives a lot easier. Thanks.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite features, so I'm very excited about it. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity, Russ. Thank you all for listening, and hopefully see you at Open World. Take care.
See you at Open World. For everybody else, I'll stick on till the top of the hour because office hours do run for the entire hour. If you have questions, please ask them. And if not, feel free to drop off. The recording will be posted sometime within the next day or so on the Ask Tom website.